As having learned about the hierarchy of the exception classes, we will see the exception handling terms. So these are the terms which you commonly use in your exception handling, and you need to know these terms to write your own exception handling programs. That is, in the program, if at all you want to handle an exception, then you must be aware of these terms. Right? The first one is try, the next one is catch, finally throw, as well as throws. So your try, catch, and finally are considered as your blocks. That means you can open a brace, you can put some code in that one, and you can close a brace. Try, open the brace, put some block of code, and close the brace. That becomes your try block. Similarly, your catch as well as finally. Whereas your throw and throws are the keywords. So we'll see in the detail with your example programs as well. So the first try block, where actually you will be using your try block, where a block of the code may raise your exception, you need to embed that in your try block. So try block is usually used to enclose a segment of code that may produce an exception. So some set of statements may raise an exception. So that set of the statements you will be enclosing in your try block. Now attached to your try block, you will be having a catch block. So your try block will raise an exception and your catch block will handle the exception. So attach it with your try. You will be opening the try, you'll place the block of the code in the try, and after that you will be writing again a catch block. So try block is used to raise an exception and your catch block is used to handle the exception. Similarly, you are having one more block called as your finally block, which is an optional statement. And this finally block will always be executed irrespective of anything. It is though it's an optional statement used after try and catch block to run your segment of the code. Regardless whether an exception is there or not, your finally block will always be executed. Right? So try and catch, and finally these are the blocks. Now the next one is throw. Throw is the keyword. It is used to generate your own exceptions. So whatever the exceptions you have seen in the last class, like arithmetic exception, null pointer exception, those are your inbuilt exceptions. Now, other than that, if at all you want to raise your own exceptions, your own exception, that is user defined exceptions, you can define your own exceptions in Java using your throw, right? And throws is usually associated with your methods. A method in the Java can also throw an exception. So that is used using your throws. That is, a method throws some set of exceptions. So I'm repeating, try is a block of the code. You will be enclosing a block of the code which may probably raise an exception. Immediate to your try, you will be having a catch block which will handle the exception. Which exception it will handle? It will handle the exception which has been raised by your try block. Now finally is an optional statement, and it will be like the place. The program looks like your try block followed by your catch block, and then it will be having your finally block, right? This finally is executed regardless of whether an exception is raised or not. So such type of the code, suitable code, you can always place in your finally. Next one, throw, is a keyword which is used to generate user defined exceptions. You can to generate an exception, that is, you can generate your own exceptions using your throw keyword. And throws is associated with your methods. Method will indicate that this particular block of the code inside your method may raise some exceptions. So in that case, you will be using your throws. So we'll be seeing in detail with the examples. First, we will be concentrating on your try, catch, as well as finally. Then we'll move to your throw as well as throws. So I have taken the same program, remove your another error. Earlier we have seen your divide by 0 as well as array index out of bounds. Now we will first limit to only one error. Now in this particular part of the code where a programmer will have a chance to raise an exception, you need to check. So I have taken the input from the keyboard for x as well as y. And where is your exception raised here? Z is equal to x by y. When it is raised, when y value is 0. If my y value is not 0, then there is no problem at all. But this is what you mean by probably raise an exception. This particular statement may raise an exception or may not raise. If it is raising an exception, then you need to handle it. If it is not raising an exception, then there is no problem. But now, because there is a probability that this particular statement may raise an error, then what you will be doing, you will be surrounding this one with your try block, right? These two statements associated with this. Now, immediately after your try, what was your try? Try will usually consist of a block of the code which will probably raise an error. Now, immediately after your try, what you have seen, you will be having your catch block. So, catch block, you will be defining the type of your exception as well. Right? This is how you usually write your catch block. Catch followed by the exception type. Exception type. What is your exception? This is a class here. We have seen your throwable. Under throwable, you are having your error as well as exception. So you can write your exception directly. Or specifically, what is this type of exception? It is arithmetic exception. So we can write even arithmetic exception E also. Now, when I am writing system dot out dot println of caught the exception. Now this is my own definition and I'll be printing the object E. What is E? The type of your E here. Right. You can see there are no errors here. Now first we'll be concentrating on your try and catch blocks. So what does your try consist of? The block of the code which may raise an exception is usually enclosed in your try block. Associated with your try block, you need to immediately have your catch block. So what is written in your catch block? Catch exception E. This exception E is the type of your exception. Suppose consider that your z is equal to x by y divided by 0, under which it is coming, it will come under your runtime exception, and specifically it is your arithmetic exception. So because exception is the superclass of your runtime exception as well as your arithmetic exception, you can directly write your exception as well, right? Or specifically you can make it as your arithmetic exception also. That also we will be seeing. Now what you have done, z is equal to x by y, it should print your z value. X and y values you need to take from the keyboard, and if it is proper you need to print the z value. Otherwise what should happen, it should handle properly such that the remaining statements will be executed. Suppose consider I am writing here system.out.print print of program terminated. Right. Now if this exception, if you are raising a divide by 0, it should catch this in this catch block. You should catch the exception in this catch block, and the remaining part of the statement program should be run as it is. This is what I have been telling, what is your exception handling. Now we'll run the program. Right, you can see enter the x value. Now I'll be entering 4. Enter the y value, I'll be entering 2. The z value is 2 and the program is terminated. This is properly done. Now for the second run, I'm running the program again. Enter the value of x is 4 and enter the value of y is 0. Now this raises an exception. Right? Now, earlier you were seeing some red color with exception and some description of the exception. I said you it is by default generated. Now this is what you have generated. I have written here caught the exception. This is caught the exception, right? And how is this statement printed? Java.lang.arithmetic exception. This is because you are printing E. Because you are printing E, the type of that particular exception or the message with respect to that exception is printed here, right? The complete message like java.lang.arithmetic exception divide by 0 / by 0. Further, the exception is caught properly, and after that what is happened? Your system.out.print statement called program terminated is also printed. Whereas if you see in the last class, what was happening? Your message, you got the message regarding that particular exception, but the further statement was not executed. The further statement was not executed. So now I'll just repeat here. Try is consisting of a block of the code which may probably lead to an exception. That is, it may raise an exception. Now immediately to your try block, you will be having a catch block. You'll be having a catch block which will handle this exception which is raised by your try block. So it is raising, your try block is raising an exception that needs to be caught by your catch block, and it should handle it properly. So once this is done, when the exception handling is properly handled, the further part of the program also will be executed, returning you or retrieving you the normal flow of the program. This is what the aim of your exception handling is. Now, as I said you, You can have an exception because it is already a superclass, or specifically you can write your arithmetic exception E also, right? So the same thing, you will be, there won't be any change in your output. Enter the value of x. I'll be giving this time some 6 and this 0, right? Caught the exception and your program is terminated. It is one and the same because associated with your E. See, this one, this statement like caught the exception, you have seen here, caught the exception. I can just remove the whole thing. Now still it is caught. You're not printing anything. Now check the output for this. Right, enter the value of your x4 6 and the value of y is 0. Program terminated. Program terminated. Why this is, nothing is printed here? Because you are not printing anything here. See, without you writing your try and catch block, that is without you handling the exception, your Java virtual machine was already handling that for you, where it has raised your default handler with the exception and your stack trace as well. But once you are handling, it is completely your responsibility to print the information about your error. Where is your information about the error present or the exception present? It is with your E. What is your E? I am defining it to be a type of your arithmetic exception. So if I just print E, you will be getting the information about E. But now what I did, I have handled the exception, but I am not printing any message. But still you can see that the next part of the program is usually executed, right? But if at all you want to print any message associated with this, you can just write E also. This is also okay. Now observe the output. Enter the value of your x4. Enter the value of your y is 0. Right. Java.lang dot arithmetic exception by 0. This is what your E is. If you print your E, this is what the information with your E. The message associated with your E is this java.lang dot arithmetic exception by 0. Program terminated. Now this is the example, basic example of your exception handling mechanism. What are the terms we have seen here? The first one was your try. The next one was your catch. The next one was your finally, throw as well as throws. So this is your try and catch blocks. So what is enclosed in your catch? The exception, that is the class name followed by your reference variable or an object. So if you print E, the message associated with that is printed. Otherwise, the exception is caught, but you are not printing anything. So even you have seen that I have removed E so that no information about your exception is printed, but the flow of the control is normal. That is, this particular statement has been executed. So this is the basic example of your exception handling program. Now, I'll be writing one more exception here. Like we have seen in the last class, now there is probability of your arithmetic exception. I'll be now creating int a equal to new int of 5. What is this? This is an array declaration which can hold 5 variables. Now I am writing system.out.println of what I need to try to access index out of bounds. So what is your index within the bounds? It is 5. So what I'll be doing, I'll be writing something like your array of 6. So now your array is defining only 5 variables, but I am trying to access the 6th element inside an array. This is your array index out of bounds exception. This we have seen even in the last program also, but now I am enclosing that in your try block. Earlier it was raising the exception, now we are enclosing that in your try block. Now observe the output now. Enter the value of your x is 5. Enter the value of your y is 0. What it has printed? The first one, z is equal to x by y, 5 by 0. It has raised this particular exception. So once an exception is raised here, the point of control of transfer will be immediately to your catch block. So it is printing you the information about E, that java.language.arithmetic exception divide by 0. Right? Now it didn't even touch this particular, from this statement, this is not even touched also. That is, once an exception is raised in the try block, it directly goes to your catch block and it will execute the part of your catch block. Further part also will be executed. Z is equal to x by y, the control will transfer, because there is an exception, the control transfer to your catch block, it handled this exception and further the the statement like program terminated is also been executed. Right now, for the next run, I'll be giving the x value is 6 and the y value is 3. Will your divide by 0 error will be raised now? No, because 6 by 3 is okay. Now see, what happened now? Z is equal to x by y, 6 by 3 is executed and the value of your Z is printed as 2. Fine, it is fine. Now comes your next one. This statement is also executed. There is no exception in this statement. But when I am trying to print your A of 6, this led to your exception. So what is the exception now? What is the exception? It is array index out of bounds exception. Have you in the catch block, what is the exception you raised? You raised about your arithmetic exception. Have you raised your array index out of bounds exception? No. So when z by x by y, you have raised the exception. So if at all your y is 0, it directly comes and it handles in your arithmetic exception. But again, what is the problem here? You didn't handle your array out of bounds exception. So what happened again? Right, your default handler has come into the picture. It has given you the information about the exception, but this particular program terminated statement is not been executed. You can see this. Now what you can do, I can go here. If at all I want to handle this, I'll be writing array index out of bounds exception. Now you can see, I'm purposefully not raising your divide by 0. Again, I'll be writing 6 and the value is 2. The value of Z is 3. Now what happened? A of 6 is leading to your array index out of bounds exception. Now it is matched to this. The catch block is mapped to your array index out of bounds exception and it is printing the message associated with your E in terms of array index out of bounds exception. But what happened to the earlier one? Now consider that if at all I am having an error, if I am raising this exception, again the same point. Now you don't have your arithmetic exception. So now what you can do is, I think you understood the point. I have removed your arithmetic exception and I made it as array index out of bounds exception. Right, array index out of bounds exception. So what is happening? Because again, there is no match for arithmetic exception. Again, your default handler comes into the picture. So now what you can do instead is, I can write it as exception E. What is exception? Exception is the superclass of both the exception, both your runtime exception, arithmetic, or your illegal state, or your array index out of bounds, and so on. So command I'm writing just like an exception. Now you can see I'll be executing the program. Enter the value of x, 4, the y value is 2, and next it has raised and it is caught and it is printing your array index out of bounds exception. We'll be seeing the another run. Enter the value of x. I'll be raising the divide by 0 error now. 0. What happened? Again it is printed now. See, if at all I am writing just exception, it solved your both the issues, like arithmetic exception as well as array, because exception is the superclass of all the exceptions here. Right, you have seen the exception hierarchy. Under this exception, you are having your runtime exception, class not found exception, IO exception, and so on. Again, in the runtime exception, you are having your arithmetic exception, your out of bounds exception, and so on. So this is what you will be doing. Now, the other way of writing this is, I can associate multiple catch statements also. You can do this one. You have handled now program terminated. You can see that you got the program terminated also. Now what I can do, no, if at all I am thinking that I need to write it as with the specific exception only, then what you will be doing is you can write multiple catch blocks also. You'll be writing array out of bounds exception E. So you can write it as system.out.println E. Yeah, the exception name is array index out of bounds exception. Right. So now one try block you are having. You are having a block of code which is raising an exception. How many exceptions will be raised? You can have the exception which can raise your array index out of bounds, and you can have an exception which is raising divide by 0 also. So now you are having multiple catch blocks. This is also proper. There is no compile time error here. So associated with a try block, you can have multiple catch blocks also. So now you execute the program because you have written specifically, there is no confusion here. I'll be writing 4. I'll be writing the next one 0. So it goes, it handles your arithmetic exception. For the next run, I will not raise your divide by 0 error. I'll be writing 8 and I'll be writing the y value as 4. The value of z is 2, 8 by 4 is 2. And what is the next one? What is happening in the next one? It goes and it handles your array index out of bounds exception. So you can have multiple catch statements for a single try block as well. Right. Now, can you write just exception for your arithmetic or array index out of bounds? See, in earlier case, what did I tell you? If you are not sure about or specifically about any exception type, you can write directly as exception E. Exception E was written and you are able to handle the exception properly. Now, suppose consider that I am removing this arithmetic exception, right? There is no problem. There is no problem. But what is happening here? You are getting a syntax error that this particular block is not reachable. Now, why does this happen? Why does this happen? Consider that z is equal to x by y. If at all you are raising this divide by 0, it is under your exception. Similarly, your array index out of bounds is also under your exception. Now, there is no point in writing array index out of bounds exception separately. This will be never reached because both divide by 0 as well as your array index out of bounds is under your exception class. See, either you write specifically like we have written arithmetic exception, there is no problem. Or if at all consider that I am writing like the first one itself exception. Exception is a super class of all types of exception. So if my divide by 0 exception is raised, it will be caught here. If my array index out of bounds is raised, it will be caught here. Then there is no way that this particular block of the code will be executed. That is the reason it is giving you one error called this is an unreachable code. So you need to either remove or change the program accordingly. What is the first? Before one we have done arithmetic exception. We have written arithmetic exception. There is no problem about this one, right? If you write specifically, arithmetic exception will go and handle in your arithmetic exception. Array index out of bounds is having separately to be handled. But now because you are writing exception, because it is a super class, both these particular exceptions like arithmetic as well as array index out of bounds come and fall into your exception. So now this catch has no meaning. This can be never reached at all. That is the reason you can either remove this. I'll be just commenting this. You can observe that there is no error now, right? You can comment this. Or what is the next solution? You have to specifically indicate that this is an arithmetic exception and this is array index out of bounds exception, right? Or I will do one thing now. Remove this. And now I am writing again this exception. Is there any error now? No. Now what is happening? See, earlier when I have written your exception first, because both the exception comes under your exception class, either divide by 0 error or array index out of bounds, it will directly come and fall into your exception E. Now you are writing specifically array index out of bounds exception. So when your compiler moves and when, sorry, at the runtime you will be getting the error. So when this statement is executed, it will directly be caught in this particular catch block because it is specifically written. Now any other errors other than this array index out of bounds exception will be caught by your exception E. So that is the reason there is no compilation error now, right? Array index out of bounds specifically it is okay. Specifically you are written this one. So this is okay. Now any other errors by default it comes and fall into your exception. That is in this particular catch block. So I'm repeating, either write your exception specifically if you know, or write one catch block and write exception E so that it can be handled properly, right? Otherwise, whatever the exceptions you know specifically, keep it in the first, and any other error, any other exceptions which you don't have any information, you can place it directly in the last, and you can give it as your exception because this is a super class of all the exception classes. Your try, irrespective of any more exceptions, it will directly be caught in this particular exception E and it will be executed. right? You can see that there is no error now. So now if at all your divide by 0 error is raised, which will be executed? This catch block will be executed because you didn't write specifically arithmetic exception. So it comes under your exception. Now because you have written your array index out of bound separately, whenever this particular exception is raised, it will be caught under this particular catch block. Let be specific with this. So what we have learned your try catch blocks. So try, a single try block can be associated with your multiple catch blocks also, right? If in case z is equal to x by y, there is no error, then this particular catch block is bypassed. Now specifically, if you are having any exception, that particular exception will be caught in your catch block and other catch blocks are bypassed. So this is your try as well as catch blocks. In the next class, we will be seeing about the other keywords.